In this video, we're going to review the distance formula and the midpoint formula, how to apply them. In here I've listed what the distance and midpoint formulas are. I've changed this up slightly from what we did in class. Instead of saying d squared equals change in y squared plus change in x squared, I've square rooted both sides. Hopefully this tries to alleviate some of the mistakes that we've been making. Keep in mind, change in y is y2 minus y1 and change in x is x2 minus x1. And also keep in mind that the distance formula is used when we're finding length. So if the directions say find the length between 2 points, it means use the distance formula. So here in this first problem, find the length of segment DA when our points are 8, 2 and negative 1, 5. The first thing you must do is find your change in y and your change in x, because that's how we're going to apply the distance formula. Recall, your coordinates are always x, y. So my change in y here is x2 or y2 5 minus y1 2. 5 minus 2 is 3. My change in x is negative 1 minus 8. It's always subtraction. If you're not comfortable subtracting these numbers, please use your calculator and type it in exactly as we see here. We should get negative 9. Now we know our change in y and x. The distance formula is a matter of substitution and simplifying. Change in y squared is 3 squared. Change in x squared is negative 9 squared. Notice I used parentheses. It makes a difference in your calculator. And I'll show you momentarily. 3 squared is 9. Negative 9 squared is 81. But notice in your calculator, if I type in 9 squared, I get 81. If I type in negative 9 squared, I get negative 81. And if I type the negative 9 in parentheses and square it, I'm back to positive 81. The correct way to type in any of these negatives is in parentheses. And you can see you will get a different answer if you do not. Make sure when your change is negative, you put it in parentheses in your calculator. So at this point, I get the square root of 90, making my distance approximately, because I can round this to the nearest hundredth. Square root is second in the x squared button, 90. Rounding this to 2 decimal places, the 6 in the third spot tells me to bump this up 1 to 9.49. That's proper use of the distance formula. Okay. I want you on your own right now to try numbers 2 and 3, both distance formula problems. So press pause, try them, and check your answers. Number 2, the tricky part here, again, make sure you got the correct number for your change in x. It's negative minus negative. Type it into your calculator that way, or type it in as negative plus 4, because a negative minus and negative is a positive. That's where we get our positive 3. Substitute into our formula, simplify, and solve. If you haven't done so, try number 3. Alright, the distance should be approximately 12.65 after I round the square root of 160. Double check your arithmetic in your change in y, change in x. The most common error I see is in that arithmetic. The last 2 problems I want to talk about are midpoint problems, so this is actually applying our midpoint formula. And in the midpoint formula, we are taking the average of my 2 coordinates. Again, I have an x coordinate and a y coordinate. When I want the midpoint, I am simply calculating x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. This is an ordered pair. I'm not asking for slope. I'm not asking for fractions. I'm asking you to just substitute in. x1 is 1 and x2 is 8. So I can just substitute those in. y1 is 4 and my y2 is 2. it's like two separate problems now. I have to simplify each. When I simplify this, it's 1 plus 8 is 9 over 2. 4 plus 2 is 6 over 2. Yes, decimals are okay. I can do 9 divided by 2 and get 4.5. That's the x-coordinate of my midpoint. 6 divided by 2 is 3. That's the midpoint. I have an endpoint, midpoint. So I have an ordered pair again. Try to follow the same logic and solve for the midpoint in number 5. So negative 3 plus 11, x-coordinate plus x-coordinate divided by 2 eventually gives me 4. 8 plus negative 6 divided by 2 gives me 1. The difference between distance and midpoint at this point is we are finding addition in our midpoint formula because I add my coordinates, whereas in the distance formula it's a difference because I need the change in my y and change in my x. So that's one of the major differences. In both cases you have to be careful with your positives and negatives.